The world was never prepared for what came next. It wasn't a natural disaster or an economic collapse that shook humanity to its core. It was something far more terrifying. One morning, without warning, the skies above major cities lit up with streaks of light. At first, people thought it was some kind of meteor shower or perhaps a satellite malfunction. But within minutes, those lights revealed their true nature: weapons. Weapons unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. The attackers called themselves the Silent Accord, though no one really knew who or what they were. Their ships hovered silently over cities, and their technology rendered Earth's most advanced defenses useless. Nuclear missiles fizzled out midair, communication networks went dark, and power grids collapsed like dominoes. In less than 24 hours, the global balance of power crumbled. Governments scrambled to respond, but every simulation and projection painted the same grim picture. Humanity would lose, and it would happen fast within 2 weeks. If not sooner. In the midst of this chaos stood a man named Elias Thorne. Once a logistics coordinator for a military contractor, he'd been dismissed from his job years ago after being blamed for a supply chain failure during a conflict in Eastern Europe. Since then, he'd lived quietly, working odd jobs and trying to forget the weight of his past mistakes. But when the Accord struck, everything changed. He found himself thrust back into the role he hated yet understood. Better than anyone else organizing resources under impossible conditions. Elias wasn't alone in witnessing the early days of the invasion. Dr. Arise Vane, a physicist known for her work on theoretical energy systems, watched helplessly as her lab was reduced to rubble. She had spent her career dreaming of breakthroughs that could change the world, but now she faced a much darker reality. Her expertise suddenly became invaluable, not because she could build weapons, but because she understood how the Accord's technology worked at a fundamental level. Together, Elias and Arise became part of a growing group of survivors determined to resist. What shocked both of them and everyone else wasn't just the speed of the Accord's attack, but also humanity's reaction to it. Most expected widespread panic, looting, and despair. Instead, something unexpected happened. People banded together. Strangers shared food and shelter. Neighbors who had barely spoken began working side by side to fortify their homes. Even rival nations, once locked in bitter disputes, started sharing whatever resources they had left. There was no grand plan, no single leader calling the shots. It was messy, chaotic, and imperfect, but it worked. For the Accord, this was baffling. Their calculations had assumed that humans would crumble quickly once their infrastructure fell apart. After all, they reasoned, humanity thrived on centralized systems. Take away governments, communications, and modern conveniences, and society should collapse like a house of cards. Yet here they were, facing resistance that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Every time they destroyed a city, another rose in its place. Every time they cut off supplies, humans found new ways to survive. The story follows these early months of the war, detailing moments of both triumph and tragedy. One particularly gripping scene describes a small town in Canada, where residents used old farming equipment to create makeshift barricades. When the Accord's drones descended, the townspeople didn't run. Instead, they lured the machines into narrow streets and ambushed them using crude explosives made from fertilizer and scrap metal. It was a minor victory, but it proved something important. Even without advanced weapons, humans could adapt. Another key moment comes when Arise discovers a flaw in the Accord's predictive algorithms. While analyzing fragments of alien tech salvaged from a downed drone, she realizes that their systems rely heavily on patterns and probabilities. Humans, however, are unpredictable. They make decisions based on emotion, desperation, and sheer stubbornness, things machines struggle to comprehend. This revelation becomes the foundation for a new strategy, introducing chaos into the battlefield. By acting illogically, humans can throw off the Accord's calculations and buy themselves precious time as the weeks turn into months. The narrative shifts between large-scale events and intimate, personal stories. We see a young boy teaching his elderly neighbor how to use a bow and arrow because guns are scarce. We witness a group of engineers rebuilding a hydroelectric dam by hand, using nothing but blueprints sketched on scraps of paper. These moments remind us that while the stakes are global, the fight is deeply personal. By the end of Part 1, the Accord has realized that their initial assessment was wrong. Humanity isn't going to surrender easily. What began as a calculated invasion has turned into a grinding war of attrition. The aliens may have superior technology, but they underestimated one critical factor: the human spirit. And as the dust settles on the first phase of the conflict, it becomes clear that this war will be far longer and far bloodier than anyone anticipated. 6 months into the war, the Silent Accord found itself in a situation it had never anticipated. What was supposed to be a swift and decisive victory had turned into a grueling, drawn-out struggle. The invaders had expected humanity to crumble under the weight of their superior technology and relentless assaults. Instead, they were facing something far more challenging: an enemy that refused to give up, no matter how dire the odds became. The Accord's leaders convened aboard their flagship, analyzing data streams from the front lines. Their algorithms turned through countless scenarios, trying to understand why humanity continued to resist. Logically, the humans should have collapsed by now. They lacked centralized leadership, their resources were dwindling, and their weapons were primitive compared to the Accord's advanced arsenal. Yet, somehow, they persisted. Every time the Accord thought they had cornered a human stronghold, another one sprang up elsewhere. It was as if the humans were fighting not as individuals or even as nations, but as a single, unpredictable organism. Back on Earth, the resistance had evolved into something remarkable. Without a formal chain of command, small groups of survivors began operating like cells in a vast network. Each group adapted its tactics to the local environment, using whatever tools and materials they could scavenge. In the dense jungles of South America, fighters used vines and tree cover to create traps that ensnared Accord drones. In the deserts of North Africa, guerrilla units struck at night, disappearing into the endless sands before reinforcements could arrive. And in the frozen tundras of Siberia, survivors tunneled beneath the snow to avoid detection, emerging only to launch surprise attacks. Elias Thorne, once a reluctant participant in this war, had become a key figure in coordinating these decentralized efforts. He didn't lead in the traditional sense. There were no speeches or grand strategies, but he excelled at connecting people. Using handwritten maps and whispered messages passed between couriers, he helped link distant resistance cells. His work ensured that supplies reached those who needed them most, whether it was medicine for a hidden hospital or ammunition for a mountain ambush. Though he often doubted his own abilities, Elias knew one thing for certain: humanity's strength lay in its ability to adapt and endure. Dr. Iris Vane, meanwhile, focused on exploiting the flaw she had discovered in the Accord's predictive systems. She realized that the aliens relied heavily on patterns, calculating probabilities based on past behavior to anticipate future actions. Humans, however, were anything but predictable. They made decisions driven by emotion, desperation, and even sheer stubbornness. By introducing chaos into their tactics, Iris believed they could confuse the Accord's machines and buy themselves more time. One of the most dramatic examples of this strategy came during the siege of the Andean shelter. High in the mountains, a group of survivors had taken refuge in an abandoned mining complex. When the Accord detected their presence, they launched an orbital bombardment, expecting to wipe out the shelter in a single strike. But the humans had prepared for this. Over weeks of backbreaking labor, they had reinforced the tunnels with steel beams salvaged from nearby ruins and rigged explosives along the entrances. When the bombardment began, they retreated deep into the labyrinthine passages, luring the Accord's ground forces inside. What followed was a brutal, close-quarters battle. The Accord soldiers, equipped with advanced armor and energy weapons, should have overwhelmed the defenders easily. But the humans fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They used every advantage the terrain offered, setting traps and launching ambush from hidden alcoves. For days, the Accord pushed deeper into the mine, only to find themselves bogged down in a maze of collapsing tunnels and booby-trapped corridors. By the time they realized that they were being drawn into a trap, it was too late. The survivors detonated the explosives, sealing off the lower levels and trapping hundreds of Accord troops underground. This victory, though costly, sent shockwaves through both sides. For the humans, it proved that even against overwhelming odds, ingenuity and determination could tip the scales. For the Accord, it was a wake-up call. Their commanders began to see that humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win.